slideshow. Presenting teams.
That bit.
Something's coming.
Yep.
Cool. Good. Yeah, okay, so let me get rid of that button. Right, so yeah, welcome everyone for this. I mean, it's a 1 hour webinar. I don't think the presentation is going to take an hour, so we've got plenty of time for Q&A at the end. This is on the Fisheries Strategic Allocation Fund, the Inland Fisheries Habitat Restoration Grant, Strategic Allocation Funds Grant Programme for 25-26. Those of you who don't know me, I'm Ben Wilson. I'm the Principal Advisor for Freshwater Migratory Fisheries for NRW. Right, this is the Water Capital Programme developed and funded. All right, the Water Capital Programme has developed and funded this grant programme. No, it hasn't. It's the Nature and Climate Emergencies. I should have spotted that in the notes. Who else have we got here? We've got Grace Akers and Anwen Hughes are here for the grant assessment team, and they'll be taking you through the grants process. Grace, Anwen, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Grace Akers. Unfortunately, we've been affected quite badly by the storm, so I have 2 plugs running off a generator. So I'm not going to put my camera on because I have no hairdryer. So apologies, guys. I am here, but I'm not gonna subject you to my crazy hair this morning. But I am the grants assessment and monitoring team leader. So I run the team who will take you through the application, through the delivery. So we'll support you from a grants technical perspective, so anything contractual, any variations, any problems that you have. And we work very closely with your GDOs who provide that technical support. And I've got Anwen Hughes on the team with me this morning, who's my specialist. So I'll, let you take over, Anwen.
Thanks. Yeah, hi, I'm Anwen. I'm Specialist Advisor on the grants team. So I'll be working through your applications and overseeing part of the assessment process. Thank you.
Cool. Just a reminder, as Helen said earlier, we'll be recording this webinar. So, just so you're aware, and there will be questions. The questions segment at the end won't be recorded. That's the usual approach to this. Okay, so so this is what we're covering today. How we can support you to get through the application process. A bit on the policy backgrounds, a bit the grant details, what's subtly changed from last year, and then over to Grace and Anwen on the details of the process. And finally, we'll come to questions. And, as we go through, please pop any questions in the chat box as we go, but then we'll come to those in the final segment. So what's the purpose of this Inland Fisheries Habitat Restoration Grant? Well, it's primarily driven by the Salmon and Sea Trout Plan of Action. So to protect through the application of best practice science and management, the sustainability of our natural resources of wild salmon and sea trout stocks, specifically in tackling physical habitat constraints in the freshwater environment. The whole idea is to deliver against the fisheries habitat restoration plans that you have pulled together, identifying the prioritized habitat constraints and actions to deliver those. It also includes the alternative mitigation budget for those rivers in which there is an alternative mitigation obligation. So specifically the Rivers Trust that currently includes is the D, the Y, and then North Wales Rivers Trust for the Silent and the Malvat. So what's included within those fisheries habitat restoration plans? It's all about, maintaining and developing connectivity challenges, by removal of barriers to fish migration, and then delivering riparian riverine habitat pressures. So just to note, these are the sort of 4 specific objectives of the strategic allocation fund that reflect the purpose of the SAF project and the alternative mitigation. So there's a one objective there, which is around program level supporting. That's the stuff principally that we do through and with Avonith Cymru. Avonith Cymru is Harriet or other Harriet or Gail in the room.
I'm here. Yeah.
Aye, cool.
Just driving away.
So that's principally the stuff we do through them. So there's an allocation of that to Avonith Cymru. That's, I can't remember if this is elsewhere in the presentation, but that's principally going to be around maintaining that All Wales database, providing that information to us in a way that we can map and put onto a GIS portal, but also helping us to this year complete the salmon pressures assessment that will inform the future development of the salmon and sea trout plan of action. There is an allocation, as I said, to each of the rivers trusts for delivery of inland fisheries habitat restoration measures, the stuff on the ground. There's the alternative mitigation bit. The one thing that is different this year is that we have an additional objective, which is to trial a catchment-based river restoration partnership on the River Tavy. So this is going to be something that West Wales Rivers Trust are going to be taking on in part in development as part of the Tavy demonstrator project. So just get onto the allocation itself. So we'll continue to have that sort of baseline allocation for each of the rivers trusts of £90,000 per annum, with the aim of delivering a minimum of 6 schemes per year. Minimum. You come back with more. And as per last year and the year before, the allocation of the remaining funds is based on a formula that looks at, the proportion of geographical coverage of the Rivers Trust, population density, and the number of WFD failing water bodies failing for fisheries in there. The alternative mitigation stuff, you know the details of this. It's as per previous years. It's based on the mitigation allocation for the fisheries of those 4 rivers that were previously delivered through hatchery obligations or hatchery interventions. The total budget, which has been split up and allocated, is the same as it has been for previous years. 1,297,000. That's been split, allocated to you all. The only difference being we've had to take from that the allocation that we're going to give for that Tavy catchment partnership. So you'll all see slightly less than the allocation for the habitat restoration. You won't see less for the alternative mitigation, but yeah, the Tavy partnership bit has had to be stripped out from the top line. I think that's that for that. Eligible activities. So what can you do? Well, it hasn't changed significantly from previous years. So restoring fish migration connectivity through the installation of fish passes, easements, and the removal of artificial barriers to migration. We all prefer removal to amendment. So if you can get rid of it, get rid of it. And then restoring river habitat in catchments of rivers, such as in-river habitat restoration and spawning juvenile habitat and riparian habitat restoration measures, such as buffer strip fencing, planting, and stock exclusion management. When you get your allocation letter, there will be a sort of a lot more detail in there. In terms of that program level reporting, this is the stuff with Avonith Cymru, maintaining the All Wales database, identifying with identified measures planned and undertaken by partners. So we keep a record of what was identified, what's been delivered. As I said previously, it's supporting NRW in the development of the Salmon Sea Trout Plan of Action and ensuring that that data is available through a GIS compatible format. Right, there's going to be a bit of a renewed focus this year on integration, ensuring that geospatial data is shared via a centralized river restoration portal. So that data, I mean, I think we've been promising this for over a year or so. That data that you provide, we map, so we can see what has been delivered. The map here is all the stuff that you've done over the last 4 years, along with the stuff that we've done through the Salmon for Tomorrow Fish Passage program. And this will be going into, those dots on the maps show what you've been doing. This will be going into a publicly accessible GIS portal on river restoration, including the other stuff that NRW is doing on river restoration and others, so that we can use this to better plan and share what's going on. Right, looking at the eligible activities for river habitat restoration and alternative mitigation. We talked about this, a bit of repeating myself a bit here, but removal of man-made barriers and installation of fish passes, including bulks, rock ramps, technical fish passes. As I said before, if you can get rid of it, get rid of it. If you can't, find a way for fish to get around it. Riparian and in-river habitat work, so stock management, fencing, buffer strip, stock watering, tree planting and coppicing, bank revetment where required, ideally natural bank revetment, gravel augmentation, in-river cover creation, any other actions that will enhance or carry the carrying capacity of salmon and trout. There you go. You've got a fairly sort of carte blanche to come up with some other things if you can. Okay, so this is one shift, and it's more of a statement of intent than anything else. Is that what we would like to see is the development of larger, and I'm going to use the word more impactful, river restoration projects. So if you can string things together into a river restoration initiative at a reach or subcatchment scale, great. Do that. We would like, ideally, you each to identify and develop at least one large-scale river restoration scheme that could be delivered in future years. You don't have to deliver it this year. What we're sort of saying, we're sort of paving the way to a future in which we can use what you do here for you to either fund by other means, HLF or something like that, a river restoration scheme, or for this to be incorporated in future inland fisheries habitat restoration grants. But by all means, look wider than just what's been identified through the individual sort of sites identified within the river habitat restoration mapping. Scheme should ideally follow, established techniques such as those identified in the River Restoration Centre River Restoration Project Proposals Manual. I can send a link round to that. We should be looking at something that includes site details and mapping, assessment of the pressures affecting a reach, assessment of the restoration options and priorities, some form of consultation with landholders and stakeholders, feasibility studies, detailed design, heritage surveys, ground investigations, and other relevant surveys, costings, benefit analysis, and identification of risks. The photo you've got there is from the Avon Edin restoration, which is part of the freshwater pearl mussel restoration project. That shows the before and after gravel boulder introductions. So we're basically saying, if you want to go and develop a wider scale project, all those things are eligible costs. What you can spend the grant money on. I'll let you read that. I don't think things have changed significantly from last year. And there's more things you can't spend the grant money on. So Gay, Grace, Anwen, there's nothing that's changed there from last year, has it?
No, that stayed the same.
Okay, so don't spend what you can. Don't spend money on things you can't spend it on. Or if you do, don't claim it. Okay, timeline. So as today, the allocation letters are going out today. You will receive them electronically by the end of the day, so you'll know how much money you've got to play with. Oh, now I've got in there proposals required in by the 3rd. Really, that should say the 20th. What we were hoping to do is, sorry,
it got updated. I did send you a message this morning
all
about
right.
it up. So those are from the grants team in terms of the
Okay,
date.
so the grants team are happy with them to come in by the 3rd. Marvelous. Okay, so I appreciate you've got Christmas is hoving into view and you're all putting up your decorations and buying Christmas presents and planning things. But on the flip side, I also appreciate that you guys have got some pretty well, this is coming. You should be able to just pull together your proposals quite quickly, I'm assuming. If there are any issues, let us know. So that's what we'd like to see them in by the 3rd of January. We estimate that it'll be, early March. We'll get the grant awards out, so we'll have to do the internal approvals process as we usually do, and you can start. This grant will start from the 1st of April, and then you've got until the 31st of March 2026 to spend that money. So I think process-wise, Grace, over to you. Or Anwen.
It's me, actually. Thanks, Ben. Yeah, we've just prepared a few slides here to just run through the process. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. Not much has changed, but we'll have a run through anyway. Thanks, Ben. As was the case last year, our grants process follows Cabinet Office guidance. So it continues to follow 6 key steps in line with that guidance, taking us from design and development right through to final evaluation. So we're currently at step 2, which is the market engagement stage, which includes the webinar and the allocation letters. As indicated by Ben, and it will be noted in your allocation letter, the deadline for applications is the 3rd of January. And so we aim to have your award letters with you by early March. Next slide, please, Ben. So the application form that you need to complete is an online form, which I'm sure you've all completed before. The relevant link to that form will be included in your allocation letter. It's also available from the grants section of our website. You'll need to take note of your reference number, which is included in the allocation letter, and this will give you the access to the rest of the application form. If you have any queries at any stage, just direct these to the grant inquiries mailbox, and we'll be able to respond to you, and that will also help us maintain appropriate separation of duties and prevent any delays in the process. Next slide, please. So our form is tailored, so it will only ask you the relevant information based on partner type. So the form's divided into sections, and you can go backwards and forwards on the form. There's also an option to save and return to it later. So the first section asks you to specify the main contact details for the project and registered address for the organisation, as well as name and email addresses for 2 authorised signatories. I would add there, if any of these details change at all during the assessment stage, if you could just drop us an email to the grants inquiries mailbox, and we can make sure that the award is issued to the correct person. Part B will ask you to outline the details of your project, including the amount of funding requested. So the allocation will be noted in your allocation letter. The project description will need to demonstrate how your project aligns with the grant criteria as defined in the allocation. We will also ask you to mention any specific consent targets, and also what you plan to do and when you hope to achieve, and how you'll measure the progress. In this section, you'll be asked to upload your project plan. Next slide, please, Ben. So this has changed slightly from last year. We previously had 2 templates to upload. One was the project plan, which was a Word document, and the other was a cost breakdown sheet. We've combined both of those, so there's only one form to complete this year, and that will include all the elements, so the actual output delivery and the claim profile as well. So the project plan template is available to download from the website. There's also a link in your allocation letter if you want to have a look at that before starting to complete the application form. Given that your programme of works is likely to consist of several different schemes, we would ask you to detail these in a separate line in your plan so that the activities, outputs and associated evidence are clearly defined for each scheme in your plan. We've also got a claim date column there against the claim period. So I think a few of you had issues with this last year, that it takes you a few weeks to compile the evidence required for the claim. So we would ask you to allow a couple of weeks maybe at the other side of the claim period just to prepare all the evidence. Unfortunately, for the final claim, we do need that claim in by the 31st of March to satisfy internal finance deadlines. Yeah, for the year-end purposes. Next slide, please, Ben. So within that project plan, you'll have a column where you'll specify the evidence that you plan to submit. For example, before and after photographs, copy invoices, and we'll also add in some standard evidence requirements in there as well. And also you'll have the value of the claim that you're expecting to make. If your application is successful, we'll use this plan to form the basis of your award letter, particularly the outputs and how you'll evidence those, and again, yeah, the value of the claim. Next slide, please, Ben. I will also ask you to list the outcomes that your grant plans to deliver. So ultimately, the work you do and the outputs that are produced should lead to longer term outcomes that will deliver for the programme. These outcomes may be longer than the life of the grant. Next slide, please. So the breakdown of costs is divided into sections. So within that first section, you have the category of expenditure. There'll be drop-down boxes to select the relevant expenditure categories here. You just click on the cell and there's an arrow that you can select subject categories. If there's any expenditure that isn't included in menus, then you can, there's an option to enter against the cell, and you can provide a relevant description, and then we'll review that in the assessment stage and yeah, allocate the appropriate category to that one. We currently allow 15% of project staff costs to be claimed as overheads. You know, this can be claimed without evidence, but if you believe your overheads will be greater than that, then if you just come back to us and we'll provide you with an additional form where we can review a full cost recovery submission. Project funding, this is the cash funding, so if you're providing match at all, this will be listed here. And then there's a section as well on volunteer time, if that's relevant to your project. I would ask in the expenditure category breakdown for you to provide as much detail in there as possible. So to save us coming back to you once we've had the application in. For example, if you've got different staff members, it's best to list them separately so we know what their role is on the project. And any large spends that you can break down, that will help when reviewing the application. Next slide, please, Ben. Losing my voice here. Hopefully I can make it to the end. So part C is all about how you'll manage the project, and you'll be asked to describe the main risks and how you plan to manage these. If you have any formal delivery partners, you'll be asked to upload a copy of any signed agreements, along with any other policies that may be relevant, such as equality, diversity, Welsh language policy, also your procurement policy. The final part of the application is the detail around funding arrangements, and we'll ask you to specify if you're in receipt of or have applied for any other funding for the projects schemes listed in the application. Next slide, please. So conflicts of interest. So it's really important for you to inform us of any conflicts of interest or things that can be perceived as conflicts of interest. This will help us ensure that our project assessors and panels are not conflicted. It also helps us prevent any delays in the process if something comes along kind of further down the line. Example of conflict of interest is where you are possibly related to an NRW employee. And that you'll need to declare that at the end of the application form. Next slide, please, Ben. So the financial assessment is completed by the grants team, tailor based on the partner type again, and includes standard due diligence checks, proportionate to the value and risk. So within the due diligence, we have know your applicants, which may include checking a company status, financial health. This could include reviewing an applicant's accounts, particularly if the published accounts are over 6 months old. So, your up-to-date management accounts will need to be uploaded in the relevant section of the application form if that's the case. We'll also review other sources of funding, so we'll check declarations made in the application form and review those as part of that process. And then finally, there's areas of special concern. Oh,
I jumped too quick.
have I talked too much on that slide? Areas of special concern. So this will include reviewing any potential conflicts of interest declared. Next slide, please. So this is just a sample of the questions that the assessors will need to address when looking at your application form. So essentially understanding how it aligns with the programme objectives, are the anticipated outputs and outcomes realistic, and value for money elements as well. Next slide, please. It's a continuation of the questions, assessing the timescales if they're deliverable, and whether we have sufficient detailed costings, and how the outcomes will be maintained after the project has ended, and if there are any risks to consider and how these have been mitigated in the application form. So they're all the questions that the assessors will need to address in their assessment, and it's what we'll base the appraisal of the application on. Next slide, please. If you need any help at all during the application process, if you contact the grants team for issues with the application forms, the annexes that need to be completed, just drop the grants inquiries email address, drop a message there and we'll get back to you as soon as possible. And any technical support, that goes to you, Ben.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Next slide, please. So if you're successful, an award letter will be sent via DocuSign to the signatories noted in your application form. So just to make them aware that they know it's coming, that will help prevent any delays. They must sign it electronically using DocuSign, as we have done for the past few years. And work shouldn't start on the project until this is signed and returned to NRW. Just to run through some key points from our grant award letter, which again I know you're all familiar with, but just to highlight some key points. A grant award letter is a legal contract with NRW and yourselves, and you'll be expected to read the terms and conditions carefully to make sure you understand and can comply with them fully. The key information that's in the grant, the terms and conditions of the grant include the value of the grant, the project start and end date, so no expenditure should be incurred outside these dates. Eligible expenditure, so within your application you will have identified the expenditure categories, and these should align with the eligible costs of the programme. So these will be reviewed in the assessment phase to ensure that they're reasonable and will then be detailed in your award letter. Any changes to the expected expenditure will need to be agreed in advance with the grants team. So yeah, please let us know if there are any changes so we can let you know how we'll treat those. Outputs and claim dates. Your application, you'll also be required to identify the outputs and claim dates. They'll also be reviewed as part of the assessment phase to ensure that they're reasonable and detailed correctly in your award letter. One thing I will say about changes and variations of projects is if you could include contingency projects in your delivery plan. So if you can provide us with a list of contingency projects, then that will make it easier when it comes to changes. If that happens further down the line, if you can't proceed with certain projects and want to continue with others, then that will make the variation process much easier for us, and yeah, hopefully prevent any delays. Within the award letter, we also have funding standard conditions and special preconditions. So these are important contractual conditions. The special conditions will be based on programme requirements and also anything that kind of comes to light during the assessment stage as additional monitoring or additional claims required, that kind of thing. Yeah, changes to project. We accept the project may change during the delivery phase. Yeah, it's important that you let us know if you anticipate any changes so that we can start the process of assessing those changes. Additional funding sources, again, if you receive any additional funding sources after you've completed the application form, then it's important that you let us know as soon as possible. Next slide, please, Ben. So once we've finalised the award letter and that's come back signed, we'll send you a welcome pack, which will include your main NRW contacts, key details of the award letter, understanding Schedule 2, which I'm sure you're all familiar with by now, and understanding the evidence requirements and making claims. There'll also be links to our current templates in there, so your claim pro forma and your transaction list. So you've got access to those as soon as you start the project. Next slide, please, Ben. So additional support, your grant delivery officer, which I believe will be the same going forward into next year's grant. So yeah, just these are people with technical specialism in your area that can support you with the technical issues. And then the grants team will manage the administration of the grants, process the claims, and respond to any queries in terms of changes to projects. Yeah, they must be agreed in advance by the grants team. Next slide, please. I think there's a bit more there, I think.
Yeah,
isn't there,
it's
Ben?
coming.
Is it coming?
I think it's coming. Try again. There you go.
Yeah. So this is the final stage and completes the grants process, the post-completion monitoring and evaluation. So that's just ensuring that the outputs are retained, the grant has achieved the programme's objectives and capturing lessons learned for future programmes so that we continue to improve with our grants administration. Next slide, please. That's it for me.
That's it.
So,
Thanks, Anwen.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that brings us to the end of questions. Before we come to questions, I don't see if there's any in the chat yet. Just to reiterate a couple of points. One, or make a point. Thank you very much for your continued effort on this. You go back to that graph earlier, you know, Inland Fisheries Habitat Restoration Grant Scheme, you know, the stuff we do, the stuff that you do through that and addressing pressures on salmon and sea trout continue to be, I think, probably the most important and I hope effective tool in our armory of trying to slow down the rate of decline of salmon and sea trout populations. And I'm really, you know, grateful for the work you guys do on that. When we report to NASCO, the North Atlantic Salmon Conservation Organisation, in June this year, we'll be doing two things. One, we'll be presenting to them the sort of the overarching sort of assessment of the pressures of salmon in sea trout. Well, salmon, they don't care about sea trout in Wales. And they're also asking us what are the most effective things over the last 5 years in the current sort of IP implementation plan have we delivered. So I'll talk about the pressures in a minute, but on that last point, I will be making the case that the funding that we've had from Welsh Government through what was the Water Capital Programme is now called Nature and Climate Emergency Funding, and the way in which we've delivered that through you guys through a strategic allocated funds, I think is one of the strong points of what we delivered over the last 4 or 5 years, and I think is a good model for others to consider. So I'll be saying that. The other thing on the salmon sea trout pressures, so we do need to revisit the salmon and sea trout plan of action. We will be doing that on the basis of a pressures assessment, and for those pressures, we will be looking at the most cost-effective ways of delivering against those pressures. So I think the salmon and sea trout plan of action will change over this year and into next, and that might influence what we ask for through the strategic allocated funds going forward. As you've already sensed from the sort of slight change, one, you know, we're looking at sort of wider scale river restoration sort of initiatives going forward. So I think that's the trajectory of travel, I think, you know, rather than just picking up piecemeal bits here and there. Not that piecemeal bits here and there aren't important, particularly when it comes to fish passage, but just to give you that sense of that's a direction of travel, and just to note then that piece that we're doing with West Wales Rivers Trust on the River Tyvi, which was sort of asked of us through the Tyvi demonstrator project. We will obviously be running that and seeing how that pans out, and that may influence what we do in the future. Also to note, you know, we are hopeful that Welsh Government will continue with the nature and climate emergency funding. Obviously, we haven't actually had formal confirmation of next year's funding. Hence, we can't give you the award letters until after that's been confirmed as part of the process. But we're hopeful that funding being continued into the future. But obviously, that funding also delivers against other water quality measures. It also helps support things like you know, metal mines, etc. So, you know, we're continuously sort of having to sort of balance all of that, and that's all going to be reprioritized over the next year as well. So again, thank you for coming today and listening to what we're saying. thank you for what you've done so far, and thank you in advance for next year. Any questions?